everybody, it's Dana and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing no line watercoloring with the Hero Arts Fall Fox. I'm also going to be doing or using liquid watercolors, and these are in the colors Terracotta, Cocoa, and Coffee, and the white liquid watercolor also from Hero Arts, as well as the bronze metallic ink. Now for the watercoloring, I am going to use the Contour ink by Hero Arts, Cup of Joe, and the white unicorn ink for a little bit of stamping later, and the bold trail map bold prints and the tag infinity dies. This is going to make a super cute card. Now, when you're doing any type of no line watercoloring, you want to use an ink that you can cover up. So the contour ink is perfect for this. I'm also using the Hero Arts Luxe White watercolor paper, and this is going to really help this image pop. Now I will go ahead and line up my image. Now, while I'm going to be showing you some of the watercoloring, some parts are sped up, but I am going to give you a few tips and tricks on how to get really great no line watercoloring. I know sometimes it can be a little bit intimidating, but with a few tips, you should be able to get success with this. And again, I always say practice what you love. And if you like to do no line watercoloring, you know you got to practice. I did stamp this image a few times just so it would show up on camera. But in reality, I probably just only needed to stamp it once or twice so I could see the image. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I went ahead and I put down some of my watercolors into a little bit of a palette here. And for this no line watercoloring, I'm using a 0 round brush and a 2 round brush. This is going to help me get the nice details here. Now, when I start off no line watercoloring, I go directly into the color and then pull that along the line. Now, a good tip is if you're doing this, I would suggest using a 0 round brush. This is the smallest of the round brushes, and it really helps you get right up to that line. Now you're going to go back in and fill in a little bit of color later, but really to get those precise lines, I really do suggest going down on your brush size. And as you can see, I do like to spin my paper so I can get that watercolor right close to that line. Sometimes if you're trying to do no line watercoloring and your image is kind of tilting away from you and you cannot see the line, you have a tendency not to be directly on the line, or it seems like your image might be a little bit distorted. So if you're like me, I just have a tendency, even when I color, I do this. I have a tendency to move my paper instead of my hand. I hope that makes sense when I say it. I like to always be able to see the line that I'm working on instead of trying to look over or like over a cast shadow to see that line. So as you can see, using that smaller brush and I'm using the terracotta watercolor here, I'm able to get a really sharp line. That's how I like to start anytime I do a very detailed image like this. Next, I'm coming in with a round 2 brush and I dip that in water and I'm just bringing clear water, clean, clear water here. Now, when I add the color, you can see it blooms. This is what I love about watercoloring. I love to watch color bloom. But as you can see, I did not have to use a lot of that liquid watercolor. I only dipped my brush in there just once and look at all the color I am able to pull. And that's what's great about using liquid watercolor over, let's say, panned watercolor. I went ahead and I dipped my brush back into my water. And as you can see, I'm really able to pull that color. I'm not having to go back into that watercolor at all. And with just using more water, I'm getting a lighter gradient as well. So as you can see, it's a little bit darker at the top. The more water I add, the more color I pull down, the lighter that color is going to be. And that's a great way to get a good gradient using liquid watercolors. So as you can see, my body of my little fox is already done. And it did not take us much time at all. Now, I did speed this up. So I think in total, it probably took me maybe 35 minutes to watercolor this. But again, I was listening to music, I was chilling, and I was in a vibe. But as you can see, I'm doing the same thing. I'm coming in first and outlining with that smaller brush. Now, using these kind of detail brushes really does help when you're doing smaller images like this. Now, if you were doing something larger, you can probably go up to a 2 or a 4 to start off with. But smaller images like this, you're better off using a smaller brush. So again, I went ahead, I outlined everything, came in with that clean water, added just a touch of color, and then it bloomed. So I was able to spread that color around. So as you can see, I'm not using a lot of the watercolor. I'm able to create that just with the water. Now I'm coming in with that cocoa color to do his little paws. Now this is going to be a very monochromatic card. It's going to be all kinds of shades of brown walking us into the fall season. Now, for a little bit of added depth, I did go into that cocoa. I watered it down just so the pigment wasn't really strong. And then I was able to do my shadow part of his paws. So this is a great way to use this kind of image and learn how to mix your colors by adding in more water to a paint ratio and really learning how to create with these liquid watercolors. Again, if you want stronger color, you're going to use less water. If you want a very light color, you're going to use more water. So as you can see, I have my pool of straight color on the side, but if I mix it with the water, I get a lighter variation. I do make sure to dry in between several of my coats, and that's just a good tip as well. If your paper is always wet, everything is going to kind of like bleed together or blend together. If you want crisp lines, then you might want to go ahead and heat set between each layer or make sure to move on to a different section while one section dries. Now I started to really build up this color. I went back in, I made sure to add a little bit more depth. And now with using the smallest of the brush, which is the 0, I'm able to get really soft lines. And this is going to allow me to get like the hair parts of his cute little tail. And by blending in a couple of those different shades of brown, it really does it look like it's hair instead of just a solid image. Now, anytime you're doing watercoloring, even if you're doing a monochromatic one that I'm doing here, or if you're doing ones that have lots of colors, let's say the rainbow colors, where we're mixing like our blues and our greens and our yellows, my big tip here is just to make sure that whatever colors sit next to each other are blendable. If you're going to be using, let's say, a orange and a blue, that's going to kind of turn things a little bit muddy. So just make sure to dry in between. Now I went in and I put in his little nose. And now in order to make the lightest color of him, I'm taking a little bit of that white. I'm mixing in a little bit of terracotta. And I'm coming in again and I'm using some white and mixing in a little bit of the cocoa. That's going to allow me to have two shades. One is a little bit more pinker or peachy, and one that is a little bit more taupe. So for the taupe color is what I did the bottom of his face with. That allowed me to have a lighter color of brown. And now the peach one I used to just fill in his ears. Now, I hope by giving you guys those little tips and tricks, you'll be confident on learning how to do no line watercoloring, especially with smaller images like this. Now, to finish this off, I do need to do his little nose. So I am going to grab a little bit of that coffee color and just add that in. Another thing too with liquid watercoloring, if you're not sure where something goes, look back at the packaging as a reference. And that will also assist you on making sure you're coloring the right lines with the right colors. I'm just going to add a little bit more color right around his little face. And then this guy is going to be done. I really love how this little fox came out. And again, the more you practice, the better off you're going to get at this. Now, before we do anything else, I do want to go ahead and heat set him just to make sure that he's fully dry before we move on to our next thing. I am going to go ahead and set him aside, and we're going to start working on a background for him. Now I have all this remaining watercolor, and I was definitely not going to let this go to waste. So if you have a little palette like this and you've put your liquid watercolor in there and you don't want it to go to waste, let me show you a way to salvage that watercolor and make a background with it. So I just grabbed a larger brush and I'm dipping it into my water, and I'm just gonna come and take out some of that as much as I can and put that down onto my glass mat. This is a great way not to waste any of this product. And I just find by using what I have in this palette, I was able to color up my little fox as well as to make a really cute background. So again, I'm just wetting my paintbrush. I'm taking out that leftover paint and just putting it onto my glass mat. And I'm going to use all the colors. I'm going to go back and I'm going to grab that peachy color that I had, as well as that more taupey color. And this is going to allow me to keep my card very monochromatic, because remember, I said this card was going to have a lot of browns in it. And once I have that down onto my glass mat, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of water to this. And this is going to allow some of these colors to really start moving. I am just going to slide down my glass mat a little bit so you guys can see it a little bit better. So all I'm doing is taking my paintbrush and I'm just going to mix these colors together. Because they're all shades of brown, they're all going to work perfectly together. Now I do want to grab a little bit of water and I'm going to hit this with some water just to get the colors moving. And I also have another piece of that Hero Arts white watercolor paper. I'm going to spritz that as well with water. And then I'm going to lay the paper into it. Now this is going to allow a lot of that watercolor to start soaking into that paper, and it's going to give me a gorgeous backdrop. So I'm going to go ahead and peel this back and look at all that color we have there. Now, again, there is still a lot of watercolor left on this mat, and I'm not going to waste this. I'm going to go ahead and keep dipping in my paper until I get a good first round of color. What I mean by first round is I'm going to build this color up. So I will go ahead and take my heat gun and make sure to dry this first layer. Now, once this layer is dry, I'm going to go ahead and turn that paper back over and start picking up some more color. This almost like reminds me of like a coffee stain. I really love working this into the paper because I'm really building up that color variation. I'll tap off any excess and then I'm going to heat set this again. And you guessed it, once this layer was heat set, I went ahead and I made one more attempt to grab some additional color. Adding just a little bit more water to the color that I had, I was able to get an even richer color brown out of this. So it's all about layering up that watercolor so really none of it goes to waste. Once I'm kind of happy with the way everything looks, and I really love this. It does look like stained coffee to me. I'm just going to go ahead and clean up the rest that I have on my mat, and I will make sure to heat set this until it's thoroughly dry. Now, once this is dried, I have this gorgeous background that was able just to create by using all of that leftover color. That's a great tip about anytime you're using watercolors. Just don't let them go to waste. You might as well use them and create a really great background. Now I'm going to clean off my mat. I did want to bring in a little bit of that bronze metallic ink. I think this stuff is so pretty and I don't use it very often. So I thought since I was keeping everything in a brown monochromatic color palette, I would go ahead and use this. Now this ink is rather thick. So in order to use this, especially if I'm going to do splatters, so I really need to water this down just a little bit. So I put some of that onto my mat. Like I said, I need to water this down and I'm going to use a fan brush on this. Now my fan brush is pretty clumped together, but I'm just going to use my nails to kind of like separate some of it. But once I dip it in the water, it's going to end up clumping back together anyway. So I added a little bit of water to my ink, and I'm actually going to add some to my paintbrush as well. I'll stir that around and then I'm going to go ahead and gently tap that so I can get some really nice splatters. Now, what's so great about this metallic ink, and I really wish I could show it a little bit better on camera, it leaves a shimmery effect behind, which is really, really cool. So if you're doing some splattering like this, or if you're even watering this down to watercolor, it's going to give you a nice little metallic shimmer. Like I said, I really wish I can show this a little bit better on camera, but trust me, it's there and it looks gorgeous. So again, I'm just going to use what I have, adding a few more larger splatters, and then I'm going to go ahead and heat set this. Now, since that is drying off to the side, I went ahead and I grabbed my little fox. Now, this stamp set also has coordinating dies. I really suggest you always get the dies with your images because it just really makes a easier way to cut them out instead of fussy cutting. I'm not a huge fan of fussy cutting. I will do it when it's necessary, but I really love coordinating dies. Now I just grabbed a little bit of washi tape just to hold this in place. Now, another tip too, anytime you're working on like watercolor paper or something that's colored, I try my hardest to kind of put the tape not on the parts that are colored, just in case it tears. Now with this paper, it did not do that, but just another one of my little tips. I do go ahead and trim this down so I can put it through my Hero Arts compact cutter. Now this little cutter is a gem. It sits right on the side of my craft table always, and it's just perfect for when you have to die cut smaller images like this, compared to me having to walk across the room to use my big machine. So if you don't have this compact cutter, I really highly suggest that you get it. It is a great tool to have sitting off to the side of your desk, especially if you're limited on space. This little cutter has a small footprint and it's perfect for using little images like this. And as you can tell, it really sticks well to my glass mat. So I can go ahead and pull that off. And now I have this adorable little fox to put onto my card. Now let's go ahead and grab that piece that we watercolored or use the remaining watercolor on. I'm going to grab one of those tag dies and I'm going to line it up in a section that I really like the color. And I think right there works perfectly. So remember, if you're making these type of backgrounds, you don't necessarily have to use the entire background. You can use dies to just cut out a portion that you like and you can save the rest of it for later. Maybe you might want to add a circle to something or a heart. So don't throw out these little scraps when you make these backgrounds because you can definitely use them for other purposes. I do want to grab my larger scissors here. And again, I'm just going to trim this down because this also fits perfectly onto my compact cutter. So I can go ahead and line that up. As long as your die fits in between those two plates, you're going to be able to use this smaller cutter. So that's another little tip. If you have dies, even tag dies like this, if they're small enough, they will fit through this cutter. So I can go ahead and run that through. And now we're going to have this beautiful piece that, remember, we created just from that leftover watercolor that I had in my palette. That gave us a great opportunity to keep this color palette flowing through the card. Now it's time to dress up this little tag. So I went ahead and I grabbed out one of the images in the Fall Fox stamp set. This is a bunch of like little leaves that look like they're blowing in the wind. And I thought that would be great to add a little bit of dimension onto this card. Now, I am using the Cup of Joe because this brown is dark enough that it is going to show up on that dark background. So again, I'm using a lot of monochromatic colors here. I'm keeping everything in the brown family. So it's really introducing our way into fall. Now, if you wanted to, you can also add some greens to this, but I really wanted everything to just match to kind of be seamless in this design. Once I have the leaves, I bring back in my little fox because I want to make it look like they're swirling around him. So I use him just as a placeholder. Then I go ahead and move him out of the way. And then I can line this swirl of leaves back up and go ahead and take this all the way around the tag. Having these smaller stamps like this is a great way to fill up a card panel, but also to fill up your smaller tags. I know we lean into the holidays and we make a lot of tags. This is a great way to use some of these smaller images. So I went ahead and lined that up. And now I just have one little area that I also need to just add a few of those leaves to. So again, all I'm going to do is pick up that stamp, just line up that little corner. And because all of this is connected, it works perfectly. So I can lay that down, make it look like my leaves are now continuing off of this design, close my lid, and I could just stamp that little leaf. Now, this video was a little bit longer than we usually show on the channels, but I did want to show you how to make that color palette kind of seamless between your image as well as your background. Now, I am using the Happy Fall stamp from the Fall Fox, and I'm going to stamp this in the unicorn white. That is going to pull a little bit of that white from our fox, because remember, we die cut him out, so he has like a little bit of a white border. So by adding in the sentiment in white is going to pull a little bit of that white. Now, once I stamp this down, I am going to heat set this in detail white embossing powder. Now, with using the white ink and the white embossing powder is going to make my sentiment pop a little bit more. So that's a good tip. Sometimes if you use just embossing powder, you might not get that crisp white that you're really looking for. So if you use the unicorn white ink first, before you end up putting on the detail white embossing powder, it's just going to make that white seem a little bit brighter onto your card. So once I have that done, I can go ahead and dump the rest back into my jar and heat set this. Now, once that's all nice and dry, and I do heat from the front and the back, it just gives a better way for your embossing powder to melt. Now, since we have this done, we have our fox done, I did want to bring in some brown cardstock. I think that really grounds everything together. However, just having a cardstock like this, I thought it looked rather plain. So by grabbing the trail map bold print, it was going to give me some texture on the back of this card, but nothing that was going to be too busy. So I am using the Cup of Joe ink to ink this up, and that's going to give me a great tone on tone. Now, the brown cardstock I'm using is Woodland cardstock, and this is such a great earthy shade of brown. All I'm going to do is just line that up right on top of the bold print, and then I'll just use my hands. Now, this is a way to use these bold prints without having to have a MISTI. So all I do is just line it up, rub my fingers over it, making sure to, I try to make sure to hit every area. And then once I lift this back, I have this great design that's, again, just adding some texture, but it's not overpowering the rest of our card. Now we can go ahead and build up our card. Now I did trim down the top of the tag. For some reason, once I put it on the card with this background, I wanted to see a little bit more of the background. So I went ahead and I just removed the top of the tag just by using my paper trimmer. So I did want to pop this up on foam tape just to give the card a little bit of height. And once I place that down, I'm going to put the fox right at the bottom. But because most of the fox is going to be on that little square, I only need to raise up his backside, like where his little tail would be. So just remember, if you're putting something up on dimension and you're putting something on top, the only part that you're going to need to have foam tape is going to be on the part that is not overlapping. So as you can see, I just cut enough to fit right behind his tail. And then once I put this down, I don't have it uneven. So for the front part of him, I just need to go ahead and add a little bit of glue just to make sure that this sticks to that card panel. And now I can go ahead and just place him down. And look how adorable this card is. And look how cute that watercolored image is. It's not like the stark black line that you would normally see in your stamping. It just really makes the image look a little bit softer. Now, all I have to do is adhere this down to a card base. And I love the Hero Arts side folding card bases. I like the top and the side folding card bases because they're super easy. I can just grab one out and I don't have to worry about trimming out any other cardstock. Now look how great this looks. Just for some added detail, I did grab a white gel pen and just do some faux stitching around the edge. And that is going to finish off today's card. I really hope I inspired you to make a monochromatic card using no line watercoloring and your liquid watercolors. All right, everybody, that is a wrap. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today, and we will see you in another video soon. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.